Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Summers, and welcome to the audio edition of Mind, Body, Soul, a show about your mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. Well, as usual, I have another interesting and wonderful guest with me. I have Judith Royle of the Royle Treatment Wellness Center. And Judith, welcome and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to come and talk to our listeners today.
Oh, well, this is my pleasure. I just love an opportunity to chat and, and share what we have available. Uh,
Absolutely. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, actually, this all started, about 22 years ago, just before I retired from my other life, and I wasn't dealing with stress very well. And so it all started with Reiki. And I found that Reiki was very helpful. And that just seemed to open the doors to other things. And so as I learned things myself, what I found helpful for me in my life, I learned so that I could share with others. So that's sort of how it all started. And then as I gathered these different modalities, I wondered, well, what am I going to do with these? How am I going to bring all of this together?
Hmm.
So, what I mean by that is I have a body of work called Soul Genesis, which I bought the rights to. So, I'm the owner and proprietor of that. And I have developed that since 2015. So, that is understanding the core essence of who we are. So, that's sort of the foundation.
Sure. Yeah.
I also do past life exploration, and that is taking a look at past lives, the information that we can learn from those lifetimes to help us with this lifetime. Mediumship, connecting with our loved ones on the other side, which is very healing and developmental in our personal and spiritual growth. I have also offered psychic readings. And now some people might think that a psychic reading is predicting or working with cards and tarot cards and so on. When I talk about psychic readings, I mean soul to soul chats. So my soul actually connects with your soul, and through that communication, the need or what you need to pay attention to comes in. It
Okay.
comes to the fore.
Okay.
Um, all right. Now, also meditation.
Okay.
That's been a very integral part of our programs. And then since 2019, when COVID hit, I started a series of 4 Monday evenings every other month to actually deal with the stress
Sure.
or actually the trauma that
Absolutely.
has ensued. And so all of these services, what I have actually done is make them address or have them address what it's like to navigate these challenging times right now. So
Okay.
it's all about helping us move forward in life.
Okay. So let's break each one down because I'm
Mhm.
sure that's a lot of information. And so if we just look at your coaching package, so just explain to people how that can help them, especially people who are stuck. I mean, we hear people who are stuck, they're spinning their wheels, they don't have any direction in life, they're kind of a lost soul out there. So
Mhm.
just explain how that your coaching packages works for many people who are on that treadmill or that hamster on the wheel, right?
Well, that was actually the answer to the question I asked: how am I going to make all of these modalities work together? And as you say, what I'm finding is people are stuck, they're spinning their wheels, they're asking the question, what am I here for? What is my purpose? Because many of us really have spent our whole lives looking after other people and not even understanding what our own needs are. And then there are the people who have been going through some terrific changes in their lives, um, terrific traumas that have come to the surface. And as you said earlier, it is giving people the feeling that they're not alone and assisting them to heal themselves, actually. All I am is the tour guide.
Yes, because when I get a chance to speak at conventions, that I always say to people a couple of things, and I'll reiterate what you said: is we all have the answer inside ourselves. We just
Yes.
need someone to help us find it, you know.
Hmm.
And then the other thing you said too was, and I think the biggest question any of us could ever answer is, what is our life purpose?
Exactly.
Why do we get out of bed in the morning? That
Exactly.
is, and that's what I think, that's part of the problem with young kids. If they don't have any goals, if they can't figure out where they're going to be in 5 years' time, then they'll turn to drugs or alcohol to
Hmm.
try and help them self-medicate, because they just don't know where they're going in life. So that was interesting, that's how you took all of the knowledge that you've accumulated over all those years and put it into a coaching package. So you've got all these skills in your toolbox that you might pick one thing from one person, something else for a different person, something else for somebody else, to do that. So you mentioned soul genesis.
Yes.
Can you do not a deep dive, but I mean, can you really just explain to people what you do and how it can help?
Yes. Um, well, as you were saying, Gary, really all we want to do is live our best lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's just finding that pathway to find that with grace and ease. That's sort of the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And what Soul Genesis does, it is actually opens up the doors to understanding the core essence of who we are. Not just who we are in this lifetime, but our souls right from the beginning of when we first became a soul. And so there are certain patterns that are consistent across lifetimes for those that are open to past lives. And these patterns follow us throughout lifetimes. So some call it karma. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
actually it's just ways of adapting, ways of behaving, ways of coping that are consistent across lifetimes. So we bring them into this lifetime thinking that they're going to help us.
Mm-hmm.
But especially in these times where everything has changed,
Yeah.
they're not working.
Yeah.
And so by understanding ourselves and what makes us tick is really crucial in understanding where we go from here.
So I guess you have to try and figure out where you are right now in life
Yes.
before you can decide your next steps, right? You have to
And
clear
what
some,
makes you tick?
yeah, what you have to clear some of that baggage that maybe have accumulated over all those years, because that's probably the stuff that's holding you back, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why the past life exploration has really tied into the soul genesis aspect of it all. Now, the difference between soul genesis, that body of work, and other work in Akashic records, let's say
Mm-hmm.
that's what we do, is that when we find something that is an obstruction or in the way of somebody moving forward, there are clearings. And that is the real cool aspect of soul genesis. I'm not just saying, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. Go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
There's actually a clearing that we still have to walk through our stuff, but at least it will open the door and give you clarity as to what to do next.
I read a fascinating book a number of years ago, and it wasn't labeled soul genesis, but it was uh, along the line of hypnotherapy, where you would be guided into a tunnel, and there would be doors uh, in different parts of the tunnel. And as you open a door, when an obstruction came up, you'd have to open a door, go in, and find out what the obstruction was, so you could clear it, so the door could disappear. So you go through all these different doors, and you'd uncover things about yourself that you didn't understand, why you weren't getting what you wanted out of life, or you
Yes,
weren't
yes.
you weren't achieving your full potential. You just knew that there was something there. So I guess that's kind of what you do. You go in. Is it a is it a guided thing that you do? Is it so that the person uncovers those blockages?
Actually, you brought up a very important point, and that is there are many fine ways of doing the getting at the root cause, let's say, and helping people move forward. And different people respond differently
Mm-hmm.
to different ways of doing things. But what this does is by reading the Akashic records, what becomes available to you is information on your soul that will help you move forward. So let's say your eternal pattern might be curiosity. Well, then you know that you are the type of person that is constantly asking questions. Why? How come? You probably
Mm-hmm.
drove your parents nuts as a kid. And also, when you're under stress and maybe working in a group, you're the person that would say, "Okay, what is the bottom line here? How do we make this work?" And I know you haven't asked that question. That's how you operate. How do we make this work? So there's those eternal patterns. Then there are core wounds, and core wounds come in with our soul as well. In other words, what are those things that push our buttons? And I don't mean just bother you. I mean really get under your skin. And so by understanding what those core wounds are, you can actually take a step outside yourself and say, why did I respond that way? And why did I behave that way? And so you can actually be a silent witness to your own actions and say, I know what that's all about. And this is how I'm going to work it next time. So you're not judging yourself. You're using discernment in changing the way you think and behave.
So,
Self-knowledge.
okay, so in this soul genesis, do you touch much on feelings?
Oh my, yes.
That's a big aspect, isn't it? I mean, once you can get in touch and identify a certain feeling, then you can kind of step back and figure out, okay, because we can't have a feeling unless we have a thought first. I mean,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
So once then you can start to move backward and what caused that feeling, and then is that the feeling that you want? And if it's not the feeling that you want, then we need to figure out a way to clear it so that the response you get is what you want, right?
But what we're discovering now is many of us grew up in an era where we weren't allowed to express our emotions, and we were taught to suppress them. I mean, stiff upper lip and all of that.
And if you're a man or a boy, it's even
Yes,
worse
yes,
because, if you go home and you tell your dad, I didn't make the soccer team, and you start to cry, boys don't cry, you find
exactly.
something else to do. So, yeah, so we weren't never very good at expressing our feelings because
Yes,
we didn't have an
yes.
opportunity to.
So, so this is all about understanding the feeling, where it came from, sitting in it, and then just letting it pass through. But what has happened is we have suppressed and repressed so much that all of a sudden it bubbles up to the surface, and the next thing, kaboom!
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't know where that came from.
um, you call it past life exploration.
I
Uh,
used to call it past life regression.
yes, yeah. Um, so talk about that a little bit, because just to reframe it,
Mhm.
and I say this as much as I can. We're born with really two fears: the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Any other belief or fear or phobia that you acquire in your lifetime, either you saw something, someone told you something, and you just said, okay, I believe it. If I drop something and mom told me I'm clumsy, therefore I must be clumsy. So the bad news is we acquire all these fears and beliefs, negative beliefs. But the good news is if we can acquire it, we can unacquire it.
Yes,
And that's and
absolutely.
that's where past life exploration comes into effect. So do you want to just spend a little bit of time in talking about your work in that area?
Oh, don't get me started. I love this work because what we're finding, especially today, is how do we deal with this, with the traumas? And we all have been through trauma. We all have a story. And so this is a way of taking a look at where that story came from.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can actually do is go back to a lifetime where we're looking for a specific piece of information.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I have a terrible fear of water. Not only will I not go in water, I don't even want to live by water.
Mm-hmm.
So we can go back to a lifetime where that fear of water first originated.
Yeah,
We first
I think we
decided.
call it the initial sensitizing event, is the very first time that happened to you.
And you
Right.
first decided that that was going to be a fear.
And it's funny that you say that. It's when you first decided. It wasn't
Yes.
something that was forced on you. You
No.
decided that
Yes.
because the eyes you were looking at was probably someone that was a very young child and didn't understand the difference.
Exactly. And you know, Gary, when it comes down to it, with all of these modalities and all these ways of dealing with our issues, it all comes down to deciding.
Yeah.
Deciding what is it that you want for yourself.
Yeah.
But I digress. So we can actually go back to a lifetime where this fear, you decided that this fear was going to be something that followed you through lifetimes, and actually change that decision. So you're actually watching that person in that lifetime, which is you in the past,
Yeah.
like a movie.
Yeah.
It's like watching a colored, in color, Technicolor
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
And and so when we get to the situation, and of course our unconscious minds are not going to allow us to go to something that's going to create more trauma.
Yeah. Because it wants to protect us.
Exactly, that's
Yeah.
our prime directive, the
Yeah. Yeah.
unconscious mind. And so that you in this lifetime with your wisdom are able to see that situation with different eyes and be able to actually work through that situation with the soul in that lifetime. So you're actually having a conversation with that soul, and in so doing you can actually change the outcome of that circumstance, that scene situation.
I had an interesting session with a client a number of years ago, and 90 an incredible number of people, for whatever reason, have low self-esteem.
Yes.
I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. And this guy was very successful. He had a couple of businesses. He owned all kinds of vehicles, big homes, summer cottages, but he said he never felt successful. And when I drilled down a bit further,
Mm-hmm.
he said his father was never around, therefore his father couldn't have loved him. So when we went back to look at the situation, and I asked him to go back and pick a time when his father didn't love him. And I said, okay, describe the event where your father didn't love you. And he couldn't describe it. So I brought him back and I held up a pen and I said, you can see that pen? He said, yes. I said, describe it to me. So he described it. And I said, so if you can see something, then you can describe it, correct? So what he was trying to describe was something that he wasn't seeing. What he was seeing was his father was not around. But he was trying to describe that his father didn't love him. So that's where the disconnect is. He assigned a different meaning to the fact that his father wasn't around. So then I said, now I want you to go back as an adult and I want you to think of a different meaning as to why your father wasn't around. And so when he went back and he said, and it's like a burden came off of his shoulders. He said, well, the reason why my father wasn't around, because my mother was a stay-at-home mom. We had a lot of kids. He worked 3 or 4 jobs. He wasn't around, not because he didn't love us. He wasn't around because he loved us. He wanted us to have a great life. He wanted us
Mm-hmm.
to do well. He wanted to provide for his family. And that's why he wasn't around, not because he didn't love us, but because he did love us. So that's what happens when you think you see something and
Yes.
then you assign a different meaning to it.
Yes, and that's what we're doing is changing perspective.
Right.
And you cannot change behavior unless you change perspective.
Totally. Totally.
And so we can actually access that in many different ways. With Soul Genesis, there are different layers of it. And when somebody comes to me and they just can't seem to get past this, and they're running tapes in their heads, and they just can't let go of something. It's all about changing their perspective. And so once we do that clearing, all of a sudden they see with different eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we do with the past life exploration, is by seeing and dealing with that situation in a different way, just as you explained in your way. then that can affect all those situations that happened after that,
Absolutely.
because it builds a gestalt, right?
Yeah,
One
absolutely.
builds on the other.
Yeah.
And so this one particular woman that I'm speaking of the phobia about water, she actually wrote a book about that phobia, and the difference it made for her clearing that in a past life. And she just is a different person. Really,
And
she's a different person.
I guess you also find this emotional release
Yes.
when people just see that this burden has come lifted off their shoulders. And I remember doing a group session, and it wasn't in anything very specific, but I just went in to do an exploration. And when we do it, you go back through time, and then the person meets their former self
Mm-hmm.
on their deathbed, and they say something to you that's going to be very profound, that you're going to be able to bring back with you today, that's going to really help you deal with some of the trauma that you're having in your life. And I remember one
It
lady.
can
Go
it can
ahead.
actually work in the opposite way too.
Yes,
Is that
absolutely.
that person on their deathbed could be absolutely terrified of dying.
Absolutely.
You have the opportunity of describing to them what a beautiful life on the other side it will be for them, and no more suffering.
Absolutely. So there's just so many great things with that.
Hmm.
uh, Judith, I think healing lineage,
Yes.
can you just spend a few minutes and talk about that?
Oh, it's this is another facet of healing that we really need to pay attention to, because what we're finding is, past life exploration is also about what we've been handed down genealogically too.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are cultural aspects that are handed down through generations that may not be helpful in this lifetime. Certainly there's wisdom from our ancestors, but when there are aspects that create trauma in this lifetime, by healing that, we are healing 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. So I'll give you an example. All right. Uh, Women today are looking for it all, but they have also been taught generationally and through whatever culture, is that you can't have it all. You're either a stay-at-home mom or you go out and you have a career. And so we're actually rewiring the brain to think differently about that. And by being able to do that in this lifetime, we're helping all those little girls grow up to realize they have choices, and it doesn't have to be that way. So that's what I mean about clearing lineage, and that's just one aspect.
um, you mentioned mediumship reading and a psychic reading, can you
Mm-hmm.
just talk about those two, and what is, if there's a difference between those two, and how that it can release people from something that happened to them in the
That's
past?
a very good question, because there's quite a difference between a psychic reading and a mediumship reading. So, mediumship reading is when you connect with spirit. You connect with the communicators on the other side, communicators being loved ones. And so, communicators have a story to tell. And the story they tell, the story that they have to share, is very different than the story they had here. So, they see things with different eyes
Hmm.
on the other side.
Sure.
And that can be very healing for someone on this side who had a certain impression of a loved one here. A psychic reading is reading. It is a reading from souls talking to souls. So my soul would talk to the other person's soul,
Okay.
and actually, it is getting at the root of what is the need. And sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. And so going by looking at it at a soul level, you are actually getting to the core essence of what needs to be addressed, what we need to pay attention to. And it's amazing how accurate a soul to soul reading is.
We're almost out of time, and I know I want you to talk about one more thing before we leave. But you brought up a point a while ago, and the question, I think the most important question that anyone could ask themselves is, what do I want? I think, and a lot of people, when they come to see me, I ask them what they want, and they tell me what they don't want. I don't want this car. I don't want this house. I don't want this marriage.
Yeah.
I don't want to live here. I don't want this job. And when you become an expert at what you don't want, then people wonder why that keeps showing up in their life all the time.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Because your brain can only focus on one thing at a time. If you're focusing on what you don't want, how can you focus on what you do want? It just becomes counterintuitive. So I think
Yes.
that's probably, if you're ever going to ask a question of yourself, the most profound question, and you brought it up earlier, is ask yourself, what do I want?
Or
And
what
then
do I need?
what
What
do
do
I
I
need?
need? Yes.
Absolutely. To be able to move on in life. Judith, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I feel like I get a therapy session every time I talk to these wonderful, wonderful people. Um, can you leave our listeners with some advice that they can use right now? Because we're coming through a terrible time.
Yes.
And people are trying to figure out how do they get back to some sense of normalcy. There's fear.
Mhm.
It looks like we're going to lift some. By the time this airs, the mandates will be lifted. So
Mhm.
what can you say to people to give them hope?
The one thing I'm sure of is that we have two needs in our lifetime. It's power, safety, and security.
Hmm.
And so everything revolves around uh, our place and how we fit in. And so for us to move forward, we need to take a look at what do we actually have control over and focus on that. Trying to control things that we have no control over is like you said, counterintuitive. It
Hmm.
leads us right down a blind alley. So focus on what we do have control of, and then focus on how do you live your best life. What is it that makes your soul sing?
Hmm.
What feeds your soul? And then when you can identify that, then you can move towards that. You've actually put it out to the universe. This is what I need. This is what I want. And this is what I can control. This is what I can't control. And so if we do that part for each of us individually, we do have an impact on the whole. But
And
trying to affect the whole individually uh, is is not going to work.
it's impossible. Yeah. Judith, thank you very much. It's been wonderful talking to you. And again, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to come and speak to our listeners. And you're welcome back to talk about other things that you have at any time.
Well, I would love to. As you can tell by the passion in my voice, I love what I do and I do what I love.
And it shows. Thanks a lot.
All right, from my heart to yours, Gary.